This episode of the CyberWire is made possible in part by ExtraHop. Intrusion is inevitable, breaches don't have to be. ExtraHop is on a mission to help security teams take back the cyber advantage. Visit ExtraHop at RSA Conference to learn how AI-based network intelligence stops advanced threats already inside your cloud, hybrid, and distributed environments. Stop by booth S1327 or visit extrahop.com/cyberwire. That's extrahop.com/cyberwire to learn more. Costa Rica's healthcare system comes under renewed ransomware attack, cyber phases of the hybrid war. Charity fraud exploits sympathy for Ukraine. The U.S. FBI attributes last year's attack on Boston Children's Hospital to Iran. CISOs are surveyed on their challenges. Robert M. Lee joins us for the launch of the new Control Loop podcast. Josh Ray from Accenture looks at ransomware trends. And Razzlekhan and Dutch, a cryptocurrency love song. From the CyberWire studios at Data Tribe, I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire summary for Wednesday, June 1st, 2022. Costa Rica continues to struggle with its recovery from a ransomware attack by Conti and has now seen its healthcare system subjected to cyber attack. Reuters reports that the Costa Rican Social Security Fund, the country's public health agency, has been forced to shut down its digital record-keeping system. This has affected about 1,200 hospitals and clinics, with possible consequences for thousands of patients. At the time Reuters filed, no group had claimed responsibility for the incident, but since then, BleepingComputer has reported that the Hive ransomware operators were behind the attack. It has generally been thought that Conti's earlier attacks against Costa Rican targets represented a kind of misdirection, intended to cover the group's reorganization and rebranding and to afford it an opportunity, Krebs on Security noted, to figure out how better to evade the sanctions that were interfering with its receipts. And indeed, the gang's calls for insurrection were unusual. Conti does seem to be connected with Hive and with a range of other groups as well. In BleepingComputer's account, while Conti is now slowly shutting down operations, it has partnered with numerous well-known ransomware operations, including Hive and Hello Kitty, Avos Locker, Black Cat, Black Bite, and others. Its members have now splintered into smaller semi-autonomous and autonomous groups that have infiltrated the other ransomware-as-a-service groups. They've also created independent groups focused on data exfiltration and not data encryption. Ukraine, not a NATO member, of course, has nonetheless joined the Atlantic Alliance's NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence and is formalizing its membership to the group during meetings in Tallinn, Estonia. The Hill quotes Ukraine's National Security Agency on what Kyiv hopes to gain from the cooperation. They say, Ukraine's accession to the CCD-COE is a significant achievement for our country in terms of strengthening international cooperation in the field of cybersecurity and cyber defense, as well as an important step toward Ukraine's NATO membership. U.S. Director NSA and Commander Cyber Command, General Paul Nakasone, was also in Tallinn this week, and while there told Sky News that, quote, "We've conducted a series of operations across the full spectrum, offensive, defensive, and information operations, in support of Ukraine." He understandably declined to say what those measures were, but stressed that they were all properly authorized, legal, and conducted with appropriate civilian oversight. He said, "My job is to provide a series of options to the Secretary of Defense and the President, and so that's what I do." German authorities have issued a fresh warning of the likelihood of Russian cyber attacks against infrastructure. Reuters reports that Berlin sees the financial sector as being particularly at risk. The U.S. FBI warns that scammers are trading on widespread sympathy for Ukraine as they frame their come-ons to prospective victims. The FBI says Criminal actors are taking advantage of the crisis in Ukraine by posing as Ukrainian entities needing humanitarian aid or developing fundraising efforts, including monetary and cryptocurrency donations. Unfortunately, this isn't new, as the Bureau points out. They say scammers similarly have used past crises as opportunities to target members of the public with fraudulent donation schemes. The Bureau would like anyone who's encountered one of these scams to let them know by filing a report with the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center at ic3.gov. CNN reports that FBI Director Wray has publicly attributed a cyber attack on Boston Children's Hospital to a threat actor run by the Iranian government. It was, he said, one of the most despicable cyber attacks I've ever seen. And he used the occasion to point out that the attack, which was for the most part unsuccessful, should serve as a reminder that the Russian government isn't the only bad actor in cyberspace. Moscow, Tehran, Beijing, and Pyongyang are the familiar four regimes given to hostile action in cyberspace. That said, Director Wray emphasized that the FBI is currently most concerned about Russia. Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Bureau has operated at combat tempo, he said. When it comes to Russia today, we're focused on acting as early, as far left of boom, as they say, as we can. We're watching for their cyber activities to become more destructive as the war keeps going poorly for them. SecureWorks Counter-Threat Unit reported today that they've found that a threat actor has replaced data in 1,200 Elasticsearch databases with a ransom note and a contact email address. 450 individual ransom requests were found by researchers, and despite the wide span of this campaign, the ransom requests have been pretty low, averaging around $620. The money is payable to one of two Bitcoin wallets, but as of the publication of the report, there are no transactions. Researchers say that while this campaign may be considered unsuccessful due to a lack of payments, this shows that the risk to companies and individuals with unsecured infrastructure is high. Aimpoint Group, CISOs Connect, and W2 Communications have released a report detailing the vulnerabilities that CISOs face. Researchers found that CISOs view today's threat landscape as worse than a year ago, and report that they find third parties, such as suppliers and partners, to be their biggest security threat. The report shows that many CISOs are prioritizing both the implementation of zero-trust models within the next year, as well as ease of use and simplicity in their security solutions. And finally, hey everybody, remember Razzlekhan, the crocodile of Wall Street, and her husband Dutch? Or as they're more formally known in court documents, Ms. Heather Morgan, age 32, and Mr. Ilya Lichtenstein, age 34. They're accused in connection with the laundering of a cool $4.5 billion cyber criminals ripped off from altcoin exchange Bitfinex back in 2016. The two were to have appeared in U.S. federal court on Friday, but prosecutors have asked that their hearing be postponed until August 2nd, so they have a chance to review the evidence the feds have assembled in their case and therefore make an informed decision about what they'll plead. There's lots of evidence. The prosecutors who worked on this over the Memorial Day weekend mentioned voluminous financial records, and Reuters says there are some 1.1 gigabytes of data to consider. Dutch is being held without bond. Razzlekhan is presently under house arrest. This seems unfair, in a way. Ms. Razzlekhan is also a rap artist, bringing her stylings to the New York Financial District, and the prospect of her posting more performances seems more worrisome than simply being a flight risk. Trust us, we've heard her rap. And now, a word from our sponsor, Recorded Future. Staying one step ahead of the rapidly evolving threat landscape requires a constant flow of daily intelligence. To stay up to date on everything happening in the world of cybersecurity, join over 50,000 other security professionals who subscribe to the Cyber Daily. With daily email updates on the latest cybersecurity news, top threat actors, exploited vulnerabilities, suspicious IP addresses, and more, the Cyber Daily is the first thing security professionals check every morning. To learn more and subscribe for free, go to recordedfuture.com/cyber-daily. And we thank Recorded Future for sponsoring our show. And it is my pleasure to welcome to the show Robert M. Lee. He is the CEO at Dragos. Rob, I am excited to say that we are heading off on a collaborative project here, the Control Loop podcast, sponsored by Dragos, and you all are, of course, heading up large parts of this effort. Let's start with some basics here. Why this? Why now?
Yeah, so good to collaborate with you. I feel like we've been in orbit with each other for a while, so it's good to put a ring on it, as Beyonce would say. So when I look at why now, the reality is OT security has become such a main topic now. Like, it is truly a global, up from executives on down to practitioners discussion. It's not just this little community that we've been, a decade ago, we could all sit around the fire literally at a conference and know everybody around us. Now it's much bigger, and which is awesome. But with that comes a lot of information overload. And there is a lot of good guidance getting out there, and there's a lot of bad guidance, and there's also just too much information sometimes for anybody to reasonably consume when you're busy day to day. So why now? Because there's that plethora of information we can synthesize down. Here is the things that you need to be aware of. What we're hoping to accomplish with it is exactly that. I'd like to make the podcast kind of two things, and that's what you and I have talked about for a while. The first thing is kind of the news capturing of all the different stuff out there, of all the new papers, of all the new research, of all the new news bites. What's your 15-minute or so digest of this, and just make this accessible to people? I mean, again, we're all overly busy. Just to be able to have audio for a commute, or even just preparing around the house for the morning, to be able to synthesize all that information. That's a good service to provide to people. So that's part of it. The second part is we are welcoming in a significant increase of percentage of professionals into the OT community versus what's there today. In other words, you onboard 500 new people into InfoSec, doesn't put a dent in the size of InfoSec. You onboard 500 new people into OT security, that's a significant contribution to the percentage of the current state of the community. And so we need to have a forum of sorts to kind of like onboard them and make sure that they are getting some basic concepts and understanding. So the second half of the Control Loop podcast, if you will, is meant to just be a very educational, hey, here's how a control loop works. Hey, here's what a gas turbine is and where you might find them and what they do. Hey, here's why OT is different than IT. So just have the kind of these educational things. And I think as we've talked, the idea is to launch each episode in its full, but to take that second half of the episode and create a library of content for people that can come back and just up-level their knowledge of ICS security.
Who's the target audience here? I mean, obviously, we want folks within OT security to listen, but it strikes me like there's a lot here for folks who are outside of that specific community as well.
Yeah, I think the first half will be kind of an everybody thing. And I hate to say it that way, but it really is. There's nobody out there that's not interested in what's happening in our infrastructure security and kind of being up to date with the news. And if you're trying to keep up to date with everything, you can't. But a 15 to 30 minute digest of here's the stuff you need to know. You'll have not only CISOs and executives and practitioners and all that, but you're going to have bankers and financial analysts and market analysts and everybody else trying to keep up to date. So I think it's going to be a lot wider than people realize in that first part. That second part will be more practitioner focused. That will be where you've got maybe the CISO who's trying to get more familiar with what programs are about to roll out, but definitely IT security professionals trying to onboard into operations. Like, I think that'll be the core segment, our core audience for that portion of the show.
All right. Well, excited to launch the new show. It's called Control Loop. Robert M. Lee from Dragos. Thanks for joining us. And now, a word from our sponsor, Devo. At Devo, they understand the cyber threat landscape is rapidly expanding, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for organizations to protect themselves from sophisticated cyber attacks. That's why they pride themselves on being true allies, not just another vendor, and why their cloud-native logging and security analytics platform is built to not only transform security operations for today, but beyond. Devo is always looking to learn more about how they can continuously support and serve the cybersecurity community, and their CEO, Mark Van Zadelhoff's new podcast, Cyber CEOs Decoded, is part of that commitment. Mark hosts candid CEO-to-CEO conversations with leaders from cybersecurity companies big and small about delivering value to customers, creating enduring cultures, and managing successes and failures in an ever-evolving technology landscape. Tune in monthly for fresh perspectives on what's top of mind for those working to protect us from some of the greatest cyber threats we face today. Devo, more data, more clarity, more confidence. And we thank Devo for sponsoring our show. And I'm pleased to be joined once again by Josh Ray. He is Managing Director and Global Cyber Defense Lead at Accenture Security. Josh, it is always great to welcome you back to the show. I want to touch base with you on some of the trends that you and your colleagues are tracking there at Accenture when it comes to ransomware.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate you having me back. The team has done, some continued research on this, dating back to 2021 to really the beginning of 2022. Yeah, and I think we've got some pretty interesting things to share with the listenership, especially things that have taken place in the previous months. One of the things that I think is heightened, and a trend that I want to kind of foot stomp, is that threat actors are moving quickly to kind of extortion, and then sometimes they're just not even encrypting a lot of the data. We've seen, even through a general lack of transparency from some companies, about 48 large companies that we were able to kind of pick up in open source that have been affected. And these are companies, roughly around over $1 billion in value. These companies, about 11 have reported that they've been, actually paid the ransom. And this notion of paying the ransoms, I think, is a kind of a key trend as well. So companies are actually paying ransoms less than they have in previous years. And we think this is due in part to the visibility of some of these particular threats, but also that some of these security mitigations that people are putting in place are actually seem to be working. Additionally, I think the threat actors are becoming much more astute with regards to the actual amount of the ransomware demanded based on the target's value and the ability for them to pay. And as I said before, this notion of kind of skipping the stolen data encryption step and go straight to extortion seems very much like an important trend. And I think lastly, speaking more broadly, the threat is demonstrating a significant amount of business acumen by reinvesting a lot of the funds from the folks that are paying these ransoms into enhancing their own operations and capabilities. So threat actors are actively integrating new data exfiltration capabilities, encryption features into their malware, and creating high-end exploit development and social engineering service offerings.
We're seeing a lot of volatility in the cryptocurrency world. Is that having any effect on ransomware operators, or do we expect that it could, and either way?
Yeah, so what we've seen is, approximately, 1/4 to 1/3 of victims that pay the ransom actually face much higher hidden costs. In some cases, that ranges from, $50 to $100 million. And after the initial attack, they're still subject to follow-on targeting. For example, many victims who pay a ransom often retrieve, corrupted data or incomplete data and still remain vulnerable to these attacks. And this repeat targeting is something that we're seeing typically about a couple of weeks after the initial payment. So companies pay the ransom, and then they're often extorted for more money not to leak the data.
So who do you see being targeted here? Are there any particular verticals that they seem to have in the crosshairs?
Yeah, I think, the top three really are manufacturing, public sector, and professional services, I think, are probably among the hardest hit sectors. Manufacturing is high on the list because, downtime for this particular sector is just not an option, right? They can't afford not to be in business. And they're usually some smaller companies with small budgets for cybersecurity, and they're not necessarily as highly regulated as some of the other industries like financial services. Professional services is also top target because, as we spoke of before, it's the ecosystem that they serve. It enables, a lot of these supply chain types of attacks on clients of the professional services company. And they, of course, have some very, intimate information that can be used for follow-on social engineering purposes as well.
All right. Well, Josh Ray, thanks for joining us. Thanks to all of our sponsors for making the CyberWire possible, especially our supporting sponsor, CyberReason. Ransomware shouldn't feel inevitable. You should feel invincible. CyberReason is undefeated against ransomware with the only predictive ransomware protection available. It's the ultimate defense against ransomware. Visit cyberreason.com to learn more. Thank you also to our friends at RSA Conference, where the world talks security. Through global events and year-round content, RSAC connects you to cybersecurity leaders and cutting-edge ideas for a safer, more secure future. Learn more at rsaconference.com/cyberwire22. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. The CyberWire podcast is proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. Our amazing CyberWire team is Rachel Gelfman, Liz Irvin, Elliot Peltzman, Trey Hester, Brandon Karpf, Eliana White, Paru Prakash, Justin Sabi, Tim Nodar, Joe Kerrigan, Carol Terrio, Ben Yellen, Nick Valecki, Gina Johnson, Bennett Moe, Chris Russell, John Petrick, Jennifer Iben, Rick Howard, Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow. And now, a word from our sponsor, CyberReason. They're out there, and they're coming for you. Ransomware attackers, sophisticated criminal armies bringing organizations to their knees and costing companies millions. But ransomware shouldn't feel inevitable. You should feel invincible. CyberReason is undefeated in the fight against ransomware with the only predictive ransomware protection available, automatically stopping attacks before encryption and empowering security teams with full visibility. It's the ultimate protection against ransomware, an AI-powered defense that defeats ransomware at every stage of the attack, stopping today's threats and ready for tomorrow's. True cyber defense designed for true defenders. Because ransomware won't define this era, those who defeat it will. Visit cyberreason.com to learn more. That's cybereason.com. And we thank CyberReason for sponsoring our show.